"Sir, you match the description of a suspect involved in a recent shoplifting. I need you to put your hands behind your back." The young police officer's voice was sharp-edged with adrenaline. 70-year-old Master Sergeant, retired John M. Mackenzie stood stunned, his right hand still gently holding the small, trusting hand of his 6-year-old grandson, Leo, who looked up with wide, frightened eyes. "Officer," Mac began, his voice calm despite the sudden fear gripping his chest, "there must be some mistake. We were just getting ice cream." The officer advanced, his taser drawn. "Don't resist, old man." Without further warning, a jolt of electricity ripped through Mac. His body convulsed as he collapsed, Leo screaming beside him. 6 minutes later, as Mac lay dazed on the sidewalk, the piercing sirens of approaching heavy vehicles cut through the afternoon air. The street began to fill with uniformed figures, not police, but United States Marines, moving with grim, practiced efficiency. If you believe no one, especially a child's protector, deserves such treatment, type honor. Master Sergeant John M. Mackenzie was a man forged in the crucible of conflict. A career Marine, his 30 years of service had taken him from the humid jungles of Southeast Asia to the arid deserts of the Middle East. He was a Force Recon Marine, a legend in certain circles, known for his quiet competence, unwavering courage, under fire, and fierce loyalty to his men. His body bore the roadmap of his service: scars from shrapnel, a slight limp from an old jump injury, and a weariness in his eyes that spoke of things seen and endured. Since retiring, Mac lived a quiet, solitary life in a small suburban bungalow. His days were now filled with tending his late wife's rose garden, volunteering at the local VFW, and, most importantly, doting on his grandson, Leo. Leo was the light of his life, a bright, inquisitive boy whose innocent joy was a balm to Mac's old warrior soul. Every Tuesday, Mac picked Leo up from school, a ritual they both cherished. Their afternoons were usually spent at the park or sharing an ice cream cone at the Sweet Spot, a local parlor just a few blocks from Leo's elementary school. Mac was not an imposing figure in his civilian clothes, usually simple slacks, a comfortable polo shirt, and a well-worn baseball cap that often bore the insignia of his old unit, though few would recognize its significance. He moved with a deliberate, steady gait, his hand always ready to steady Leo, his eyes always watchful, a habit ingrained from decades of vigilance. He was a grandfather first now. His past glories and hardships were packed away with his dress. Blues, or so he thought. That Tuesday was bright and sunny, a perfect autumn afternoon. Mac and Leo had just left the Sweet Spot, Leo happily licking a double-scoop chocolate cone, his small hand tucked securely in Mac's larger, calloused one. They were ambling down Main Street, discussing the merits of superheroes versus astronauts, when their peaceful afternoon was violently shattered. A police cruiser, light suddenly flashing, screeched to a halt beside them, cutting them off on the sidewalk. 2 officers jumped out, both young, their faces set in grim, determined lines. One, Officer Miller, clearly the senior, approached Mac and Leo aggressively. "Stop right there! Hands where I can see them!" Miller barked, his hand already resting on his sidearm. Mac, startled, instinctively pulled Leo slightly behind him, his protective instincts flaring. "Officer, is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, trying to shield Leo from any perceived threat. "Problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem," Miller sneered, his eyes raking over Mac's unassuming attire. "His age?" "We had a report of a shoplifting incident at the convenience store down the block about 10 minutes ago. Suspect was an elderly white male, gray hair, wearing a cap, accompanied by a small child. Reportedly used the child as a distraction. Fits you to a T, Grandpa?" Mac was incredulous. "Shoplifting?" "Officer, you're mistaken. We just came from the ice cream parlor. We haven't been near any convenience store." Leo, sensing the tension, clutched Mac's leg, his ice cream forgotten, his lower lip trembling. "Please, officer," Mac said, his voice pleading now, more for Leo's sake than his own. My grandson is frightened. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Miller retorted, is you thinking you can get away with it. People like you using kids, it's disgusting. He gestured with his chin. Turn around, hands behind your back. You're coming with us for questioning. Your second officer, a younger, more nervous-looking man named Peterson, moved to flank Mac, his hand hovering near his own taser. I will not be treated like a criminal in front of my grandson for something I didn't do, Mac stated, his voice now steely, the old Marine NCO snapping to attention despite the civilian clothes. He stood his ground, one hand protectively on Leo's shoulder. I am happy to cooperate, to answer your questions, but you will do so respectfully, and you will not frighten this child further. Officer Miller saw Mac's quiet defiance not as the stance of an innocent man protecting his grandson, but as resistance. His face hardened. Resisting, huh? Thought you might be the type. He unclipped his taser. I gave you an order, old man. Last chance. Turn around, hands behind your back, or I'll assist you. Leo started to cry, burying his face in Mac's side. Please don't hurt my grandpa, he sobbed. Shut the kid up, Miller snapped. Then to Mac, you brought this on yourself. Mac took a half step back, trying to shield Leo more fully, his eyes never leaving Miller's. This is unnecessary force, officer. I am not a threat. This child is terrified. You're a threat if I say you are, Miller snarled, his finger tightening on the taser's trigger. You match the description. That's all I need. Before Mac could utter another word, before he could even process the sheer unreasonableness of the situation, Miller fired the taser. The barbs hit Mac squarely in the chest. An agonizing jolt of electricity ripped through his body. His legs buckled, his vision blurred. He felt his grip on Leo's small hand loosen as he crashed to the hard pavement, his body convulsing uncontrollably. The last thing he heard, before a wave of blackness threatened to engulf him, was Leo's terrified, piercing scream. Officer Peterson, the younger cop, looked visibly shaken by the sudden escalation, his eyes wide with alarm as he watched the elderly man twitching on the ground, the child wailing inconsolably beside him. Miller, however, looked grimly satisfied. Should have complied, he muttered, holstering his taser and reaching for his handcuffs. All of you think you're above the law. Several bystanders had stopped, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and fear. Phones were out, recording. One woman, a mother herself, cried out, He's just an old man, and the little boy, what are you doing? Miller shot her a glare. Police business, ma'am. Move along. He knelt beside Mac, ready to cuff him, even as Mac's body still shuddered from the aftershocks of the taser. Leo, hysterical, threw himself onto his grandfather, trying to protect him. Leave him alone. You hurt my grandpa, Peterson, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tried to gently pull Leo away. It's okay, kiddo. He'll be all right. But his voice lacked conviction. Mac lay on the cold sidewalk, his body aching, his mind struggling to clear through the fog of the taser's assault. He could hear Leo's desperate sobs, feel his small hands tugging at his shirt. The shame of being incapacitated, humiliated in front of his grandson, was almost as painful as the lingering electricity. He tried to speak, to reassure Leo, but only a groan escaped his lips. Officer Miller roughly rolled him onto his stomach, yanking his arms behind his back to apply the handcuffs. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through Mac's taser-weakened muscles. Just as the first cuff clicked shut, a new sound pierced the air, a sound utterly out of place on this quiet suburban street. It wasn't the usual siren of a police car or ambulance. It was deeper, more resonant, the unmistakable growl of heavy-duty engines accompanied by the rhythmic whump, whump, whump of approaching rotors. Heads turned. Even Officer Miller paused, looking up, annoyed by the interruption. Coming down Main Street, moving with a disciplined speed that scattered civilian traffic, was a convoy. Not police cruisers, not fire trucks. These were military vehicles, 3 heavily armored Humvees and 2 larger troop transport trucks, their olive drab paint and stark white stenciling, identifying them as United States Marine Corps. Simultaneously, the sound of helicopter rotors grew deafening as a sleek, dark green UH-1 Huey helicopter, also bearing Marine insignia, appeared overhead, circling once before expertly landing in the wide, empty intersection just a block away, its downdraft. Whipping up dust and leaves, doors on the ground, vehicles burst open, and uniformed Marines, clad in full combat utility uniforms, helmets, and load-bearing vests, though visibly unarmed for this deployment, began to disembark with practiced, silent efficiency. They didn't rush. They moved with a controlled, purposeful urgency, fanning out, establishing a secure perimeter around the block containing Mac, Leo, and the 2 stunned police officers. Within 60 seconds, Main Street was effectively sealed off by a cordon of impassive, disciplined Marines. Officer Miller stood frozen, handcuffs dangling from one hand, his jaw slack with disbelief. Officer Peterson simply stared, his face ashen. The bystanders were speechless, their phones now capturing an entirely new, utterly bewildering drama. From the lead Humvee, a figure emerged who radiated an aura of absolute command. He was tall, lean, his uniform immaculate, despite the unexpected deployment. On his collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel was clearly visible, Colonel James Iron Jim Rohr, commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, currently stationed at a nearby base for a joint training exercise. He was known throughout the Corps for his unyielding standards, his tactical brilliance, and his almost paternal devotion to his Marines, past and present. His eyes, like chips of ice, swept the scene. The downed elderly man, the crying child, the 2 local police officers looking increasingly out of their depth, and the ring of his own Marines securing the area. He strode directly toward Officer Miller, his polished boots clicking ominously on the pavement. Officer. Colonel Rohr's voice was deceptively calm, but it carried an edge that could cut steel. What precisely is transpiring here? Miller, visibly intimidated, stammered, "Sir, Colonel, we had a report. Shoplifting." Suspect matched the description. He resisted. Colonel Rohr's gaze flickered to Mac, still on the ground, then to the taser on Miller's belt. "He resisted," the colonel repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "And your response was to tase an elderly man while he was holding the hand of his grandson." Before Miller could answer, a Marine sergeant who had been kneeling beside Mac, checking his vitals, looked up. "Colonel, sir, it's Master Sergeant Mackenzie. It's Mac." Rohr's head snapped toward the fallen man. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He took 2 quick strides and knelt beside Mac, his earlier icy demeanor replaced by a look of stunned recognition and profound concern. "Mac? John Mackenzie? My God, man, what have they done to you?" He gently touched Mac's shoulder. Mac groaned, his eyes fluttering open, focusing with difficulty on the familiar uniformed figure above him. "Jim?" he whispered, confused. "It's all right, Mac," Rohr said, his voice now filled with a warmth that belied his rank. "We're here. You're safe now." He looked up at the Marine sergeant. "Get the corpsman over here now and get these damned cuffs off him." The sergeant immediately produced a cuff key and quickly undid Miller's restraints. Another Marine, a Navy corpsman, rushed forward with a medical kit, beginning to assess Mac. Leo, seeing the Marines, seeing their calm efficiency and the concern on the colonel's face as he spoke to his grandpa, quieted his sobs slightly, though he still clung to the corpsman attending Mac. Colonel Rohr stood, turning the full force of his icy glare onto Officer Miller. "Officer," he began, his voice now resonating with cold, controlled fury. "You tased Master Sergeant John Mackenzie. Do you have any idea who this man is?" Miller, trembling slightly, shook his head. "He's a decorated Force Recon Marine, retired," Rohr stated, his voice ringing through the silent street. 30 years of service, multiple combat tours, recipient of the Navy Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Bronze Star with Valor. He has bled for this country in ways you can't even imagine. He has trained generations of Marines, including half the men on this street right now. He is a living legend in the Corps." The colonel took a step closer. "And your department's intelligence led you to believe this man was shoplifting and using his 6-year-old grandson as a distraction?" He then turned to Officer Peterson, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. "And you, officer, you stood by and allowed this to happen." Peterson hung his head, unable to meet the colonel's gaze. The local police chief, a Captain Davis, arrived then, lights flashing, siren wailing, pushing his way through the crowd of onlookers, his face a mask of alarm and confusion as he saw United States Marines effectively occupying his main street. "Colonel Rohr," Chief Davis exclaimed, recognizing the CO from the nearby base. "What in God's name is going on here? I got a report of an officer-involved incident." "An incident?" "Chief?" Rohr cut him off sharply. "I'd call it an outrage. Your officers just assaulted and unlawfully detained one of the most decorated Marines in the Commonwealth in front of his grandchild, based on a flimsy description and a profound failure of judgment and de-escalation." He gestured toward Miller. "This officer deployed a taser on a 70-year-old man who posed no conceivable threat." The chief looked from Rohr to Miller, then to Mack, being helped to a sitting position by the corpsman, his face growing paler by the second. He saw the taser barb still embedded in Mack's shirt. He saw the terrified child. He saw the ring of silent, watchful Marines. He knew instantly that this was a public relations and interagency disaster of monumental proportions. The aftermath was swift and decisive, orchestrated with military precision by Colonel Rohr and his men, in jarring contrast to the earlier chaotic actions of the local police. Master Sergeant Mackenzie was carefully assisted into one of the Humvees, the corpsman accompanying him, while another Marine gently comforted a now calmer Leo, assuring him his grandpa would be okay, and producing a Marine Corps challenge coin for the boy to hold. Colonel Rohr had a very brief, very pointed, and very private conversation with Police Chief Davis behind the closed doors of another Humvee. The exact words were never made public, but Chief Davis emerged looking 10 years older and visibly shaken, immediately ordering Officers Miller and Peterson to surrender their badges and service weapons pending a full internal and external investigation. He then personally offered a profound apology to Mack, which Mack, ever the stoic Marine, accepted with a quiet nod. The Marines maintained their perimeter until Mack and Leo were safely on their way, not to a hospital. Mack refused, insisting he was fine, just shaken, but to Colonel Rohr's on-base quarters, where he would be properly looked after. The actual shoplifting suspect, it was later discovered, had been apprehended 20 minutes before Mack was tased at the other end of town. A much younger man who looked nothing like Mack, aside from perhaps wearing a baseball cap. The convenience store clerk's initial description had been vague and panicked. Officer Miller, it turned out, had a history of excessive force complaints, particularly involving older individuals or minorities, complaints that Chief Davis's department had, until now, largely dismissed or buried. The videos taken by bystanders went viral within hours. Marines rescue tased veteran grandfather from police blazed across internet headlines. The public outcry was immediate and immense. Officer Miller was suspended without pay, and later, after a damning internal affairs report, heavily influenced by testimony from Colonel Rohr and several Marine witnesses, he was dismissed from the force and faced criminal charges for assault. Officer Peterson received a severe reprimand and was reassigned to desk duty with mandatory retraining. Chief Davis announced his early retirement a week later. Mack recovered quickly from the physical effects of the taser, though the emotional impact, especially on Leo, lingered. Colonel Rohr and his Marines, however, unofficially adopted Mack and Leo. They became fixtures at battalion family days, Leo delighting in sitting in Humvees and helping the Marines with their simulated tasks. The VFW post where Mac volunteered received a massive influx of donations and new members. The story served as a harsh lesson for the local police department and a rallying cry for veterans' rights advocates across the country. It highlighted the dangers of profiling, the necessity of de-escalation, and the profound importance of understanding the invisible wounds and visible dignity of those who have served. Mac never sought the attention, but his quiet strength. In the face of injustice and the swift, unwavering loyalty of his Marine brothers resonated deeply because for a Marine, the bond of service never truly ends, and when one of their own is threatened, especially a legend like Mac, they will move heaven, earth, and, if necessary, clear a few streets to make things right. True brotherhood isn't just a word. It's a force of nature. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe our heroes deserve respect on every street, and that loyalty is the bedrock of honor.